When the Civil War Trust comes out into the field and speaks with historians and we analyze battles and battlefields, how do these historians know what happened during the Civil War? Obviously, as far as I know, none of them were there. But we, of course, start with primary sources. And the most primary sources of all are, of course, the earliest accounts of the battle. Most Civil War officers, or at least many, submitted official reports for their units after a particular fight. You, of course, have early photos of a battlefield. And those photos, despite some myths about photographers moving bodies around all the time, really don't lie. And then, of course, you have the battlefields themselves that really help as primary sources. You also have early cartography, maps that shows what a battlefield looked like at the time. And you can put these early sources together and really start to understand what happened during the war. To that, we can add a copious amount of post-war accounts. You have early newspaper accounts. You also have regimental histories written about particular units. You have veterans' newspapers, like the National Tribune and the Confederate Veteran. You have large numbers of various secondary books written about particular units, the Union Second Corps of the Army of the Potomac, for instance, and so many other particular Confederate brigades. And you can take all these things together along with photos, early accounts, and battlefields, and then some even oral accounts, as it got much later, and put these things together and really get a good understanding of the battlefield. However, any particular battle, especially that we're analyzing today, is inherently interpretive. You take this evidence and you might say that an account written the day after the battle is a lot more reliable than one written 20 years later, but these are some of the challenges that all historians and interpreters have in trying to interpret and understand a Civil War event. Because on the afternoon of July 2nd, 1863, Benning's Georgia Brigade charged through this particular gully here at Devil's Den. In 1913, a guy named William R. Houghton came back and wrote home to his newspaper complaining about the lack of Confederate monuments, but also wrote about the place that he had fought 50 years earlier. He specifically wrote about charging through a rock-filled gorge, and he remembers the line of blue-coated regulars above him, not quite 20 feet. He also talked about how the gallant Muse and a guy named Mays also were shot through the head by the almost vertical fire from these rocks. So you stop, and I went and looked back, and there is, in fact, a guy named Houghton fighting here in the 2nd Georgia on July 2nd, 1863. And indeed, there was somebody named Muse and somebody named Mays that were shot and killed with head wounds that day. So Houghton is at least relating something that really happened, and his account continues. He says that Mays fell to his left, striking his feet. And he said that the Government Avenue now runs over the spot where it happened and not a few yards away from a sign that says Devil's Den on it. And this is really important to me because, stick with me, here you have a guy that fought in the Battle of Gettysburg in 1863 and comes back in 1913 and uses a road put in 1897 and a sign put in 1900 to tell us today what happened in 1863. Okay, so you can use an early account about what the 2nd Georgia did. You can use his reference to a road that wasn't here during the battle, but is here now and was here when the veterans came back, and a sign to help us understand a little better. And finally, if his account is correct about where these guys fell, the 2nd Georgia isn't exactly where I expected them to be. I always thought they were further out in that direction as opposed to closer to the rocks, and now as a historian, I have to deal with that. This is the type of things historians really have to get into all the time.